Welcome to the Pick Six Podcast Emergency Pod Edition. Me, Ryan Wilson, joined by Tyler Sullivan, or as people who know him call him, Sully. Not great news if you're a Colts fan. That's pretty much been the case the entire season, Sully, but especially on today, Monday, November 7th, hours after a truly embarrassing loss to your New England Patriots, the Colts have decided to fire Frank Reich. So this is week 9. What are your initial reactions just hearing this news about the decision to move on from Frank Reich? I believe a week after they decided to move on for the offensive coordinator.
Yeah, not totally surprising. It kind of felt like this was inevitable at some point, the way that the Colts were trending 3-5-1 on the season. And at a certain point, obviously the Matt Ryan stuff, whether he's benched because he's injured or because they just want to move on and see what they have in Sam Ehlinger because they know that he's not the future, it felt like this team was very much on the doorstep of a reset. And I think we all looked at it from a quarterback standpoint of, okay, maybe they're going to go into the draft and get somebody else. But on top of that now, this hasn't really worked out for Frank Reich here. And you could point to the quarterback issues as being a key reason for that. But ultimately, if you're going to kind of do this hard reset, you might as well also do it at the head coaching spot. Now, could you have done it at the end of the season? Sure. But at this point now, you're kind of looking at them and they look lifeless at this point. I mean, Sam Ehlinger, 103 yards, interception. They were sacked 9 times in that game yesterday. It was just, really just a poor showing, and it has been that way for the past few weeks here for the Colts.
Yeah, yesterday against the Patriots, and the Patriots offense, it has not been itself for at no point during the season, and I don't think you would disagree with that. But the Colts offense made that Patriots offense look like the 2007 Patriots. The Colts went 0 for 14 on third downs yesterday. I mentioned this yesterday on the recap Pick Six pod, and I'll just mention it again. Zach Kiefer wrote this for the Athletic. I just have the quote handy, so I'll read it again, talking about the Colts organization in the wake of that New England loss. And he wrote, imagine benching your quarterback, firing your offensive coordinator, trading your second best running back, trying to fix 6 offensive line combinations in 9 weeks, shifting from run heavy to pass heavy, back to run heavy, and still having the worst offense in football. And I think that's what's so hard to wrap your brain around. I think that offensive line in Indianapolis is the highest paid offensive line in the league. They're playing like one of the worst offensive lines in the league. Ryan Kelly, the center, Quentin Nelson, the guard, basically said as much after yesterday's game. And so you follow the Patriots closely. I didn't watch that game nearly as closely as you probably did. Just what were your take? Like, if you were watching this game in black and white and you didn't know which team was which, and if you had to decide, okay, this Colts team must be Team X in the NFL, like what did that feel like to you? Because I'm sure it didn't feel like a typical Indianapolis team that's been so successful for so long.
I mean, it felt like a preseason third quarter game. I mean, that's really what it felt like with, both of these teams, but really Indianapolis. It looked like one team was playing the starters and just kind of going through the motions, trying to figure out what they kind of get right. And the other one was, all right, you know what? This is our third string guy. He's, maybe going to make the 53-man roster type of an outing there. And I mean, it's like 75 degrees in Foxborough yesterday too. So it kind of felt like it was the summer and all that too. But ultimately, it just feels like this team right now is 100% lost. And you can blame it on the quarterback situation too. I mean, I don't want to keep, maybe, making excuses for Frank Reich, but at the same time, you're talking about this team and the Colts over the last few years, just trying to retread it at the quarterback position, whether it be Phillip Rivers, Carson Wentz, this year, Matt Ryan. At some point, you kind of need to develop and bring somebody along. I guess maybe they were trying to do that with Ehlinger, but clearly he doesn't seem like he's a guy. It seemed like they were just kind of maybe grasping at straws more than anything.
He was a 6th-round pick for a reason, and no disrespect to Sam Ehlinger.
Exactly. And so for me, this is more of a sign for the Colts that they are it's going to get worse before it gets better. They're going to go to the bottom, and they're going to try to get as high of a pick as they possibly can and be in the quarterback and probably in a ton of your mock drafts as we get closer to the spring.
Brinson's not here to defend himself, but he would try to make the case throughout the first, 6 or 7 weeks of the season that they play in a truly crappy division. I think the Titans actually might have something to say about that. I think we all slept on the Titans to our detriment. And they were 3-2-1 after their Week 6 win over the Jaguars. They somehow scored 34 points in that game. And it felt like, I don't think at any point we all thought this team was fixed. There are teams in the NFL now that are winning ugly, and you're like, okay, hopefully they can figure this out. At no point did I feel great about this Colts team, even when they were 3-2-1. They've since lost 3 straight. They lost to the Titans, where they scored 10 points. They lost to the Commanders, in which they scored 16 points. And, of course, they lost yesterday, where they scored 3 points against the Patriots. The last 2 games, Ellinger started. And I think you're exactly right. Now, part of this is just being unlucky because Andrew Luck decided to call it a career. And then you roll with Brian Hoyer and Jacoby Brissett, and that's, you don't have a choice. You're just trying to duct tape and chicken wire this thing together for a season and then reset. But the reset was Phillip Rivers, which isn't a bad reset option. But again, that's a short-term solution. He retired. And then it was Carson Wentz. Carson Wentz felt to me like, okay, we're going down this road, and either it's going to work spectacularly or it's going to go over the cliff and the car is going to catch on fire before we hit the ground and we're going to die twice. And it ended up being the latter because Carson Wentz didn't work out. They gave up capital for that. I think most people, I don't know, I'm not trying to be a revisionist history here, but did you think that Carson Wentz thing had a chance of working out?
No.
I didn't either. And I think Frank Reich, hoping against hope, knowing his experience with Carson in Philadelphia and how they had this close relationship through the draft process, I thought they could rekindle things because here's the thing, and Billy, you might want to weigh in on this, because Frank Reich was a huge part of that Super Bowl run in Philadelphia. And everyone said once Frank Reich left, oh boy, Doug Peterson can't do this by himself, with Carson Wentz in particular, because Frank Reich was sort of the soothsayer. Turns out it wasn't all Doug Peterson and it wasn't all Frank Reich. And I think you're right. I don't think this is all on one person. But at some point, you can't just keep firing assistant coaches. The buck has to stop with you. And it feels like Jim Irsay had finally had too many come to Jesus meetings and said, all right, something has to change.
And that's part of it too. I mean, you even go back to right before Frank Reich was hired. He wasn't even the number one choice.
Oh my gosh,
this was the Josh McDaniels hiring, and all of a sudden going back to New England, and then they hire Frank Reich. And I think that
by the way, it turns out Josh McDaniels did him a favor.
I guess that might be true. And so even just going from that standpoint too, it just felt like it was very clunky in terms of big picture decisions all the way up to ownership with Jim Irsay, whether it's going with Josh McDaniels and then it's Frank Reich, and then you try to fix the quarterback situations. And again, nobody knew that Andrew Luck was going to retire and all that. You know, that's just a tough situation to ultimately be in, having to throw in Jacoby Brissett out of that first year. But at some point, you need to be better at evaluating what kind of quarterbacks, if you're going to go down that veteran quarterback path, you need to find better ones than old Phillip Rivers. Sorry, Will. Carson Wentz, Matt Ryan at the tail end of his career. I mean, you could have made a better case for a Jimmy Garoppolo over this summer than Matt Ryan, in my opinion. And I don't think it would have cost you that much more.
What do you think, Billy?
No, yeah, I definitely agree. Like, especially when Doug Peterson was here and we lost Frank Reich, it was just like especially when you saw Carson Wentz start to decline, especially coming back from that injury. The whole thing was like, oh, like, Carson Wentz doesn't have his guy. He doesn't have Frank Reich anymore. Like, why would the Eagles ever let Frank Reich go? And to see everything fall into place how it did, and now him, being released and not being the head coach of the Colts anymore, and having, some success with Phillip Rivers, I would say, and then just seeing the decline after that is just kind of disheartening and questioning, like, okay, so like, how good was Frank Reich really? Because he had Carson Wentz on his team, and we thought when he got him that, Carson Wentz was going to find his game again, and that just didn't happen. So what did Frank Reich really do to help that Eagles team win a Super Bowl? That's what I know Philadelphia is worrying about and thinking about. So I really just don't know. But yeah, it's just crazy how things have all panned out.
And it's funny. It's crazy too. Real quickly, it's just when you look at his statistics over the course of his tenure too. I mean, in terms of just point differential, he's top 10 in 3 out of his 5 years as head coach, and that is with all of that quarterback uncertainty. So they were able to put up points. They were able to play defense, run the football, obviously more recently with Jonathan Taylor. But the fact that they have not made the progressions in the postseason, I think, is mostly what we've seen so far. Obviously, last year, we all know in Jacksonville with Carson Wentz and in that debacle, that was just
got the Steelers into the playoffs, that terrible performance.
Horrible.
But that's the thing, though.
But some of it has to go on the coaching staff as well. As much as we're saying, like, that's on Carson Wentz not playing well and whatever.
Yeah, Carson Wentz didn't trade himself to the Colts.
Exactly. You need to game plan certain, and you actually have to know your personnel as well. So, I mean, yes, as much as we're saying, the quarterbacks have been retreads and you're kind of just trying to figure it out on the fly, basically, you also need to coach it up as well.
Okay, so I'll ask you guys this. do you feel like the Colts weren't successful because of coaching? Because that's why I brought this up to Ryan before we started up the show, is that like I didn't feel like the Colts weren't successful because of poor coaching. Like you can look at the Raiders and be like, they're not successful because of coaching. You can look at
the Carolina Panthers.
You can look at the Carolina Panthers. They're good because coaching is not good. I would say that the Colts weren't good because of coaching. They weren't good because of personnel, which lies with more so Irsay than it does Frank Reich. So, and I just feel like, I mean, obviously the owner's not going to fire himself, but at the same time, it's like, I mean, I just don't think he really deserved to be fired. That's just my opinion.
Well, this is where I think it falls on Chris Ballard now, who is very much on the hot seat. It's the same thing that we're talking about. You know, we talk about their performances and point differential, top 10 out of 3 out of the 5 years that he was head coach. We're talking about the quarterbacks being the biggest issue on this team. Like you were saying, Billy, it's not that the coaching was the biggest issue for the Colts over the last few years. It's been the quarterback. And so now you're getting rid of the head coach. There's nobody else other than Chris Ballard that you're looking at this point saying you have to fix it or you got to go. You're the next guy out the door.
Sully, you know what's funny? Like Frank Reich obviously got fired. We fired Will Brinson, but here he is. He's here to talk about. He ain't going away. Frank Reich can take a lesson from Billy Brinson here. So Brinson,
what did I do wrong? Frank Reich.
I'm just making the joke that we always try to fire you. You refuse to leave. Yeah. You are a squatter on the Pick Six.
I do find it interesting that they fired Reich mid-season because, like, Ballard is. I think this means to me that, like, I guess Chris Ballard turned on Frank Reich to save his own job, which.
Yeah, I don't know, and I only say because Irsay's had these meetings with these guys more than Bolcutt's had the meetings with Josh McDaniels, Mike Davis. Who's Mike Davis? So I think that Irsay, he's the guy that has his finger in the pie. I think that's a saying all the time. So this isn't, and I'm sure he said, "Listen, we got to get this fixed." I think it's the old person saying, but he's having these meetings. He's not talking about pie recipes to keep this going. He's talking about why is this team so terrible? Bench Matt Ryan. I'm assuming he said that. Get Sam Ellinger there. Make this thing work. Someone has to get fired after X loss, so they fired the offensive coordinator. And I think he's just going down the list of names. And I think Chris Ballard's name is probably next on the to-do list if something doesn't magically happen over the final 2 months.
I think I don't know what they're going to do with Chris Ballard. I'm a little surprised they wouldn't just fire him like with Frank Reich. Like I don't know the point is. I also think that Frank Reich talked Chris Ballard into getting Carson Wentz.
100%.
And I mean, like Chris Ballard did not want to do it. You could hear it in his comments, like when they first got Carson Wentz there. And Irsay 100% is still mad about Carson Wentz. Like he's still holding a grudge about Carson Wentz. He's also, as you can see from the comments he made about Dan Snyder earlier this offseason, he's like getting very worked up in general. I think he wants to win something, and he doesn't like and he's blaming Frank Reich for the problems because of the quarterback position. So
you mentioned you were surprised the order, I'm assuming, but Brian J in the comments asked he was surprised that it happened mid-season. Not surprised that it happened though. I mean, how much longer are you supposed to sit through this?
I guess I'm surprised that if you're gonna, I think it's probably good for Chris Ballard if Frank Reich is fired mid-season. I don't think it's like turn this around or else you're fired too. I think it's like,
taking a bigger picture, is it better for the Colts to fire Frank Reich now or later? I think why wait?
Sure. I mean,
why are you hesitating?
I mean, the Colts were done. The Colts were probably done anyway.
Well, let me just clarify. I was talking about you when you weren't here because I said for the first 6 or 7 weeks, you were trying to prop the Colts up because they played in a terrible division. They were 3-2-1 at one point. Matt Ryan, he had to be benched. And you're like, well, they're not out of it. That's what you would say. That's not untruth, right?
I mean,
Billy pulled the tape. I already had him queued up. No, I'm just kidding. But I don't think that's not unreasonable. That sounds like something you might say. But my point is that if they're still in it in your mind, keep Frank Reich around. But if you're not, if this team is rebuilding, what's the way?
I mean, I think if you're ditching Frank Reich, you're trying to like sink as low as possible to get the tie pick.
Right, and they were kind of signaling that also. I mean, obviously with Allen,
I think it's a full-blown tank job.
Yeah,
and
I don't
right, and the whole isn't the whole part of it too. And I was trying to look it up. I couldn't do it on the fly, but isn't part of the reason? Yes, Matt Ryan has a right shoulder injury, but isn't it also they owe him a ton of money if he plays a certain amount of snaps
yeah,
as well?
that's
Like,
right. I believe that's right. Yeah.
So
There's no snap percentage thing in his contract, but if he gets hurt and can't pass a
right,
physical there,
he has to be able to pass a
$1 million.
physical. Yes, exactly. So that's what it is. And so, you know, you're making those types of decisions just a couple of weeks ago. You're looking for the future. You're clearing out money. You're obviously starting Ellinger, and you know we all know at this point. You saw it over the last couple of games here. He's clearly not the guy, but he's the perfect guy if you want to start tanking. You just roll that guy out on a weekly basis.
He's like Curtis Painter 2.0.
I mean, it's perfect.
I don't know. I don't think they're tanking, because when you say you're tanking, that means that every player who their entire life has been extremely competitive and usually the best player on the field is buying into the notion that
No, the players aren't buying in. You're just
buying. But
you're
okay.
treating it
Well,
like
I don't. My
you're
point is
treating
that I
it
don't
like
think it's like
Major League the Baseball movie where you're making it impossible for them to win by virtue of like taking everything. Like you
But
take away the head coach.
nothing's changed except you're getting rid of the guy who was calling terrible plays. How's that tanking? That feels like the opposite of tanking. The players are the same.
You have a quarterback who's like never played it. Like you have Sam Ellinger and now like Gus Brad. I mean, did they announce it? I know they tweeted out the thing.
No, Irsay just tweeted it. I just tweeted that they've moved on, but that's it. That's all I've seen.
The Colts just sent a link out to make it official. Yeah, I'm sure it's a one sentence article.
But but to go back really quickly, just on the overall, like Frank Reich, is it his fault? Is it the Colts' fault? Is he not, outside of Sean Payton, one of the more attractive head coaching candidates in the NFL?
Well, it's funny. So what I was going to say, so his first year, Sully, he was 10-6. Then they went 7-9, 11-5, 9-8 last year. And this year the wheels fell off. So it's not like this guy has been Josh McDaniels from day one, or Matt Patricia to keep it in Sully's neighborhood.
Frank Reich will get another head coaching job.
Well, if you're the Denver Broncos, you're not like, oh
Right.
man, would we not love to swap this out?
Put the polio reverse Josh Mack on him.
I also wonder if it's possible that Frank Reich met with Chris Ballard and Jim Irsay last night after getting absolutely smoked by the Patriots. It was like, listen, we need to play, like, this Ellinger thing is not working. Like we need to just play Matt Ryan if we want to try and win. And they're like, no, you're not playing Matt Ryan. He's like, I
This
can't.
is theory, or you got this based on
No,
something?
it's a theory.
Oh, okay. I'm just asking.
But like, and they're like, I can't. And he's like, I can't coach if you're forcing me to, coach like this. And they're like, well, then you're fired.
It's kind of similar to what Ryan was just saying about the players. Like, they're not going to tank. And maybe this is a coach who's saying, like, listen, I can't coach to knowing that there's better options on the roster that I somehow can't be at my disposal.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's entirely possible that this is the result of a meeting with Irsay that went down in a way that it became clear that it wasn't tenable for Frank Reich and Chris Ballard and Jim Irsay to work together. They had too many fingers in the pie, I guess is what you're saying.
So our buddy Greg Doyle, who writes for the Indy Star and used to work for CBS Sports way back in the day, and he's as close to this as anyone. He's been in Indianapolis for, I think, a decade now. He thinks John Fox might be the interim, is his speculative guess, which is interesting. He thinks Gus Bradley's too busy being the defensive coordinator. So that would be interesting. Good old John Fox.
John Fox was on that coaching staff.
And I'll be honest, if it's John Fox, then you were 100% tanking. I take back everything I just said.
John Fox been to 2 Super Bowls, man.
Despite John Fox being on staff, I agree with that. That's the qualifier. Also, my first thought when Frank Reich got fired was that's too bad for Frank Reich. My second thought was, can the Steelers hire him to replace Matt Canada? I'm not even joking.
I mean, or the Patriots to replace. No, Matt. We're happy with Matt Patricia.
Oh yeah, thrilled. You see that yesterday? It was great.
Yeah,
perfect.
Hey, you beat the
Mac
Colts.
Jones. Mac Jones looks great, guys.
A team without a coach. You beat a team without a coach.
I think that this is. To me, it's just a case of Ballard and Reich had been aligned for basically his entire tenure. I mean, I know this sounds. I swear this all comes back to Carson Wentz.
Okay. I mean, you like conspiracy theories. You like
it's not a conspiracy theory. Like Wentz, Reich, who won a Super Bowl in Philly with Wentz as the starting quarterback for most of that season until he got hurt in 2017. Believed in Wentz, brought him in. It went disastrously. The only way to replace Wentz was to they traded him away because Irsay was pissed about that. Like Irsay wanted to fire everybody after the end of last year. Could not believe they missed the playoffs and lost to Jacksonville.
Lose a first round pick in the process.
And
I mean,
lose a first
there
round
was
pick.
all the elevators.
Yeah, of course. And then you go and make the trade for Matt Ryan. And I think you can say, like, I mean, I think you can say that Ballard probably pointed back to the Wentz deal. Like Ballard's big about having his picks. He's big about his budget. Like he's big about cleaning it up. And he and Frank worked great. But then like once Wentz took away that first round pick, once Wentz put his job on the line because he vouched for Frank Reich, who's vouched for Carson Wentz. And then you're like, all right, the only guy we can go get is Matt Ryan, and that ends up poorly. It becomes like, all right, what are we going to do about this in Irsay's mind? And at that point, Chris Ballard, is probably saying, listen, Frank's sort of lost his fastball, Jim. Like, and I don't know whether Chris Ballard could save his job, but I don't know that necessarily that Irsay wants to try and reboot at the end of the season. I'm sure. You think about back to 2011 and 2012 with what they did with Luck and Peyton and Polian and Grigson and all that. Like, will he allow Chris Ballard to continue to make the selections and continue to hire the coach? Because I do think Irsay is so involved at this point as an owner, hands all in that pie, that it may be too much for him to be able to like allow Chris Ballard to handle the next whatever's next.
Well, what I find interesting too, I mean, obviously we're going to start thinking about like who could be the next head coach in the Indianapolis Colts. First name that comes to mind, if you swing for the fences, it's Josh McDaniels, exactly. But for me, it's Sean Payton. But isn't one of the main things that Sean Payton wants, or the couple things we've heard reports, he wants to be able to have control of the roster.
Yep.
Can't necessarily do that if Ballard's around. He also wants a top tier quarterback, and he wants to be able to pick that. Now, if they get a high pick, Ryan, you could tell me more about, who, if they get a high enough pick, then who they should grab and all that kind of stuff.
They're going to trade for Mac Jones, but go ahead.
That's totally fine. I'll take the first round pick as well. And so, I mean, we have Bailey Zappi now too, so it's totally fine. But for me, you look at what they've been able to, what they have in front of them.
They're second place in the division, by the way.
Oh, boy, here we go.
They're also 6 point underdogs against the Raiders this week, and the Raiders look horrible. So speaking of Josh McDaniels, so this team's not going to be good.
Colts revenge game against Josh McDaniels. Jim Irsay revenge game.
It's really just going to be a great game on Sunday at 4:05. I'm sure it's going to be
on CBS. Be careful.
It's going to be great. I'm going to watch it. Of course, I'm going to watch it. But again, with Sean Payton as probably the number one target there, you need to set things up in a way. You can't just say like, all right, Chris Ballard's our guy, because you're going to completely eliminate probably the top candidate because he wants to have control of the roster. So maybe you're kind of waiting it out. They're saying just, all right, like, at some point you move on.
I think that Jim Irsay's presence may be too much for Sean Payton unless you have
the bigger issue is they don't have a quarterback. Sean Payton's not going to a team without a quarterback, and currently they have the 14th pick, which maybe gets you a rookie quarterback, but I don't know if Sean Payton wants a rookie quarterback. He'd probably rather have someone like, say, Justin Herbert or Tua Tagovailoa or someone in that conversation, not someone who's currently playing in college. So what do you guys think?
Well, that was going to be my question, Ryan, real quickly, was, how far do they have to go down to realistically get into, obviously they're not going to get the number one overall pick, but do you have to get into that top 10 for one of these quarterbacks to follow you? Or is it, you have to be top 5? Where are we with that?
So there'll be 3 or 4 quarterbacks that go in the first round, and you can get one as we sit here at 14. Maybe you have to move up to 10 or something. I don't think it's going to be a situation where you have to get into the top 5, because the reality is that Bryce Young is small, and some NFL teams are worried about that, but he is the best quarterback in this draft class. So that's some other math you're going to have to do. The other guys all have issues, even though they're all 6'4" and 225 or whatever. So those are the considerations. CJ Stroud is having a good season. I wouldn't call it a great season. I don't think he's better than Justin Fields was at this point coming to Ohio State. Will Levis has looked like crap, but his offensive line sucks, and he's been hurt. And Anthony Richardson is so incredibly raw that you could draft him if you're the Colts. He ain't going to be good for 3 years. So Sean Payton ain't signing up for that either. So, yeah, this draft class is supposed to be miles better than last year's draft class at quarterback. It may end up being slightly better. Kenny Pickett was the only one to go in the first round, and obviously that's worked out swimmingly for the Steelers, but the next quarterback wasn't drafted until round 3. So I wanted to mention this. 74 games is how many games Frank Reich coached in Indianapolis. What was his record? Don't cheat. Or cheat if you want to, if you're John Breach. How many games did he win? I'll just ask you that. Out of 74, how many did he win? 5 seasons, 4.5 seasons.
I'm not cheating. I'm doing the math of like to 500. Because I think his winning percentage was probably like 57%.
All right. You can do percentages if you want.
42 games.
Yeah, I'll say he was around like 10 games over 500.
Oh, you guys are close. I think Brunson cheated for sure because he was way too close with the percentages and the actual number of.
I divided 74 by 2 and then like added some games. That's, I mean, it's
40, 33 and 1. So you guys are both right. And I mentioned that because it is not uncommon for successful coaches to get fired. I looked this up quickly. Tony Dungy in 2001 got fired after going 9-7. We know how that ended for the Bucks. They won the Super Bowl the next year with John Gruden. Schottenheimer got fired in 06, which you forget about because he refused to play Phillip Rivers, and they kept running the ball 5 million times. He had a winning season. Do you know what? Oh my God, I forgot about this. Do you know what Marty Schottenheimer's record was in 2006 when he got fired?
Yeah, he won like 13 games.
14-2. What a world!
14-2. It's unbelievable.
Mike Ballard, 2017, in that sort of. I think he was like sort of the interim or something. It was something weird.
It was
Mike Mularkey with the Titans. He went 9-7. And
no, he went to the playoffs.
Back-to-back years, and he got fired.
They lost to the Chiefs, and Marcus Mariota caught the pass. They threw the pass to himself, caught it.
Oh yeah,
scored. They lost, but they lost to the Chiefs in that playoff game, and everybody knew that like if they somehow didn't beat the Chiefs in the playoffs, he was going to get fired anyway. Now, so, they worked out because they hired Vrabel. But
I will say this: like it worked out for the Buccaneers. I think Tony Dungy got the short end of the stick, and John Gruden won with Dungy's players, no doubt.
But Dungy won too.
Right. My point is that the Buccaneers went to the Super Bowl and won it, which is what you want to do. And Dungy had to be the scapegoat. But Mike Mularkey got fired. They hired Mike Vrabel. You could argue that was a good hire because Vrabel's a good football coach. Lovie Smith got fired in 2012. He had an 81-63 record. He had gone 10-6 that year, and he got fired. And they hired John Fox, which you could say was an F- hire. And then finally, do you guys remember who? I know Sully doesn't because he probably didn't have a beard at that point. Who his successor was, Brunson, in San Diego at the time?
Yeah, it would have been North Turner, right?
Norvell, you got it. So this isn't a one-off. Winning coaches get fired all the time. Although these are different in that these coaches actually had winning seasons their final year at those destinations, whereas say Frank Reich. So is he going to be employed as a head coach next year?
I'd say there's what's his winning percentage? 54%.
Yeah. That's great.
There's a 54% chance he's employed as head coach next year. Same as his winning percentage.
He's an offensive guy. Carolina Panthers have a top 3 pick. What about Carolina?
I mean, yeah, I think Carolina would be a huge upgrade for the Panthers. I think it'd be a great upgrade for the Panthers. I mean, I think if you're Frank Reich, you have to think about whether that's a good
right.
So you remember Rex Ryan took the Bills job. John Fox took the Bears job. A lot. Yeah, Lovie Smith. I mean, took the. A lot of times when you're
a second time head coach.
Thank you. I don't know what the hell I was going for there, Sully.
Retread. I think you're going for retread.
Retread is what I was going for. Thank you. If you're a retread head coach, you need to be a little more cautious, I think, about your job selection. And a lot of times these guys who are coming off the first head coaching job, got fired, know they can still coach, know they can be a good head coach, want to dive back in immediately. And I think that, you see, you take a year off, maybe you have better options. Like you see Sean Payton doing it, Mike McCarthy did it. And I know that,
Doug Peterson did it and he ended up with Trevor Lawrence and the Jaguars. I mean, again, that's not out of the realm of possibility here for Reich at all.
Yeah. So, Ryan just shared a very old takes exposed situation 7 days ago. NFL.com reported Frank Reich's job is considered to be safe. Whoops.
Well, wasn't that the whole thing too? And this is something I should remember is, because this is what you're saying, Will, is a narrative that we up here experienced a ton with Josh McDaniels. You take a million interviews, it'd always get close, be a finalist, and then, come out and, leave at the last minute. Obviously, Indianapolis was a big one. He accepted the job and then left. A lot of people with the conspiracy theory was like, did he know about Andrew Luck? And is that why he decided to leave? But like you're saying,
right,
these coaches need to be very particular in that next spot because, and I think we're seeing it now with Josh McDaniels, if this doesn't work out with him in Las Vegas, he's a coordinator for the rest of his career. And the same thing could be said with Reich here if he doesn't pick this next spot right. So a year off might be the best course of action.
Well, here's the other thing to follow up on that, Sully. And look, this isn't a call out NFL or a rep sheet, just to point out that a lot probably happened in the last 7 or 8 days.
I think this goes back to the Josh McDaniels thing, though. And whoever's gonna be next. All of this is like Jim Irsay is not a patient or necessarily not sane, but like if you're working for the Colts,
Easy, Terry Bradshaw.
There's an emotional there's emotions that go into the decisions. It's not necessarily surgical.
Yes, right. Yeah, that's right. Yeah, that's a good way of putting it. A little more politically correct than Brinson did. But what I was going to say, Sully, maybe perhaps not being a head coach is in the best interest of Josh McDaniels and Frank Reich, because I say all the time, like these coaches, these hot new offensive or defensive coordinators get hired for head coaching jobs, which are completely different job descriptions, and people are surprised when they suck at it. Well, you're asking, a guy who's a medical doctor to be really good at building houses. Guess what? They both use tools, but they're different tools, and the expectations, I think, have to be tempered in that respect. So less pressure, less management responsibilities, and if you're really good at X and O's, embrace it. I mean, it's easy for me to say. A lot of this is just guys that are ultra competitive and want to be the best of the best, and I get all that as well. But I think there's a lesson to be taken from Nick Saban being like, you know what? NFL ain't for me, fellas. Peace out. I'm going to go win a bunch of football games in college.
And I know that we're talking, the Carson Wentz thing is I would put 80, 90% on Frank Reich. That's totally true.
Yeah, for sure.
But at the same time, you are talking about a head coach who's in a very impossible situation of having a different week one starter for every year that he was the head coach of the Indianapolis Colts. That's a tough thing for Bill Belichick, Don Shula, whoever, the all-time greats to deal with, let alone Frank Reich.
Yep. Hey, let me ask this quickly. Just what do you want to do?
Well, I need to go. I have to go join our pal Adam Gold.
Okay. Well, I'll ask Sully this. Thank you for hopping in.
All right.
And then we'll get out of here.
You can wrap it up.
Yeah. I just got one more question. Let's Sully. Let's talk about something. Good day. What do you think about the idea? I don't know how closely you follow college football. What do you think about the idea of thinking outside the box with someone like Lane Kiffin, who is incredibly successful at Ole Miss, has been incredibly successful as a college coach, had some success with the Raiders. I think they were in Oakland. I can't remember how long ago. It's been so long ago. But he's a loose cannon. I mean, there are stories where it's not a story, it's the truth. Nick Saban left him on the runway at the airport because he was goofing around and not showing up on time. But in terms of getting the most out of his players, being innovative as offensive mind, do you want to think outside the box if you're the Panthers or the Colts, or is that a bridge too far?
Maybe a little bit of a bridge too far for the Indianapolis Colts, kind of because what we were saying with Irsay, and I don't know if that's the winning formula. I mean, who knows? Maybe it is. Maybe it's just rocket fuel and it sends them to the moon. But ultimately, I don't know if that's necessarily the right way to go. But also, I mean, whether it was, because it's all in the same coaching hiring cycle, I guess, whether it was McDaniels or Frank Reich, there was offensive minds, a little bit more of a conservative type of decision at the time to bring those guys along. Maybe there is something to be said for doing something a little bit different. I would almost lean a little bit more defensive than I would offensive.
Really?
I really would, because I think we're almost oversaturating the market with offensive-minded head coaches.
Sully, would you hire a defensive guy to call offensive plays, for example?
I don't know if I would do that. I don't, as we've seen, I don't know if I'd have a former special teams coordinator as the quarterback's coach. So, but again, you never know.
To each their own.
To each their own, exactly. But I think maybe kind of zag, if you're going to go in sort of a different direction, I would do something along those lines. Maybe his name's escaping me, but the San Francisco defensive coordinator, who he's someone who I would.
Hey,
again,
to your point, at. Robert Saleh was the former San Francisco defensive coordinator.
Sure.
And by the way, who the Colts' former defensive coordinator was? A man named Matt Eberflus, who's doing okay in Chicago.
Sure,
they took him a while to figure it out, and they had that offense that what appears to be on the right track. So you might be onto something.
That's DeMeco Ryans. I would look.
DeMeco Ryans.
Thank you,
DeMeco Ryans. Thank you very much. That's who. Again, that's a kind of a decision that I would look at. Maybe not going into the college ranks and trying to find. You're more likely to find Matt Rule 2.0 than you are the next great college head coach.
The reason that Kiffin's name came in my mind is because he is so sort of outside the box, unconventional in every aspect, but he gets results, and sometimes that's what's appealing to owners who are tired of losing.
Yeah, but it's not like he's Mike McDaniel. I mean, I don't follow college as much, but it's not like he's like eccentric like Mike McDaniel. Like, he's kind of just more of a little bit different, right?
He's like a frat guy.
Yeah, so
he's really good at football.
So I don't know if that. I'd rather the kind of nerdy weirdness than I would the fratty, college bro. If that's
I actually like
that's
your
the
theory
preference.
about the perhaps leading into the defense. That's a good point. I'm going to give you credit for that when I steal it from now on going
Sure.
forward until it doesn't work. Billy, anything
And
else
then
you want to
blame
hit
me.
on, or is that good? I'll take that to mean Billy's fine with where we're at.
I think we covered it.
Yeah, all right. Sully, thank you for joining me, and thank you for joining Brinson on his podcast as he goes on to do bigger and better things. Best of luck to Frank Reich. Hopefully that job interview in Pittsburgh as the offensive coordinator goes well, because we need you. And that's it. That's the emergency pod for the Colts. Moving on from Frank Reich. We'll see what they do going forward. But for now, they do not have a full-time head coach. Sit there at 3-5-1. It's not a very good football team. All right, Sully. Thank you. We'll talk later, guys.